A man standing in your doorway clutching a large shiny axe. Sounds like your worst nightmare, doesn't it? But for the residents of New Orleans, Louisiana, for a long time this was a possibility, and for some, the last thing they ever saw. Let's take a look back at the unsolved case of a brutal killer never identified, the Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman terrified New Orleans, Louisiana and surrounding communities from May 1918 through to October 1918, when he vanished forever. The Axeman was never identified, and his reign of terror remains unsolved. The Axeman mainly targeted Italian immigrants and Italian Americans, leading many to obviously assume the murders were racially motivated, but of course this could never be proven due to the Axeman never coming to justice. The Axeman first took the life of Joseph Maggio, an Italian grocer, on May 23rd, 1918. Beginning what would become a trademark of the Axeman, he attacked the man and his wife while they were sleeping, at their home on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia, where they owned a barroom and a grocery. The maniac cut the couple's throats with a straight razor, and then before leaving, bashed both their heads in with an axe. Miraculously, Joseph actually somehow survived the crazy attack, but sadly died minutes after being discovered by his brothers. Police were baffled by the murder and ruled out robbery as a motivation, as the couple's items and money were out for all to see and they were not taken by the Axeman. Joseph's brother Andrew claimed he discovered the bodies of his brother and sister-in-law when he heard strange groaning noises through the wall. Andrew said he was unable to hear the gruesome noises of the attack due to being intoxicated, as he had returned home late and was not in a fit state. Police were still perplexed at this, however, believing anyone would have heard someone break in and commit such a grisly crime. Because of this, Andrew became the chief suspect in his brother's murder, but was released very quickly, as no evidence could be found. Andrew later claimed that an unknown man was lurking near the residence before the murders, and he believed this unknown figure to have been the Axeman who killed his brother and sister-in-law. Not far from the murder scene, police found a bizarre cryptic message chalked on the pavement. It read, "Mrs. Maggio is going to sit up tonight, just like Mrs. Tony." This strange comment was interpreted as a reference to the alleged attack of another couple of Italian grocers in June 1911, Anthony and Joanna Sciambra. Joseph's sister Catherine Maggio was discovered shortly after, dead. Her throat was cut so deeply that her head had nearly been severed. Unlike her brother, Catherine could not hold on and died instantly, a long time before she was discovered, also by her brothers. The Axeman struck again in the early hours of June 27, 1918, ending the lives of Louis Basuma and his mistress, Harriet Lowe. Louis was also a grocer with a store located at the corner of Durgenois and La Harpy streets. The ill-fated man was struck with a hatchet just above his right temple. Harriet Lowe was savagely hacked over the left ear. The two bravely survived the attack and were discovered by a baker wagon driver shortly after. The worker found Basuma and Lowe bleeding heavily, with the axe that belonged to Basuma himself discovered in the bathroom of their apartment. The two were apparently also sleeping when the Axeman decided to ambush them. The police frantically looked for someone to pin the attacks on and arrested Was The Axeman, who had been employed in Basuma's store a week before the attacks. However, no evidence existed that could have pinned the murder on the man, but police claimed that Ubicon gave conflicting accounts of his whereabouts on the morning of the attack. Not long after this attempted murder, Lowe claimed she could remember the attacker being African. However, her statement was discounted by police due to her being in a delusional state of mind. Once again, no money or valuables were taken from the home, which again proved the Axeman was only interested in murder. Ubicon was released, and the search for the Axeman continued to puzzle police. Although Louis Basuma survived the attack, better times did not lie ahead for him, as police began to suspect him being a German spy, as letters written in the language were discovered at his home. Harriet Lowe put further pressure on him by telling the police this was correct, which led to an immediate arrest. However, 2 days later, Basuma was released and the police who took him in were demoted due to unacceptable handling of the situation. Lowe was not done with her accusations, however, as in August 1918, she claimed as she was close to death after a failed surgery that it was Basuma who was responsible for the insane axe attack. Shortly after her death, Basuma was arrested and charged with murder, spending 9 months in prison before being acquitted of all charges on May 1st, 1919. The Axeman continued his wave of mayhem, even attacking 8 months pregnant Anna Schneider on August 15th, 1918, cutting her scalp open. Curiously, the Axeman left her alive, and Schneider remembered nothing of the attack and gave birth to a healthy baby girl 2 days after the incident. The Axeman was actually spotted on his next attack by Joseph Romano's nieces, who heard a commotion in the next room and came in to see their uncle lying there after a savage blow to the head and the assailant fleeing the scene. The girls recall he was a heavy-set man dressed in a dark suit and hat. Romano initially survived the attack but sadly died 2 days later due to severe head trauma. The madman committed his most evil murder of all on March 10th, 1919, killing Rose Cortimiglas as she slept with her 2-year-old daughter sleeping in her arms, who the Axeman also killed with a single blow. Speculation was beginning to start about who the Axeman was. John D'Antonio, a retired Italian detective, suggested publicly that the madman was the same individual who had killed several people in 1911. The methods were very similar, and D'Antonio said he believed the killer suffered from multiple personality disorder and for certain killed without motive. He described the Axeman as a real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, who was going through an internal war against himself. Scholar Richard Warner chipped in on the Axeman's identity, believing him to be Frank Mumphrey, who had an alias of Joseph. Mumphrey was said to be shot to death in December 1920 by the widow of Mike Pepitone. It was speculated that Pepitone was exacting revenge on her husband's murderer. The events allegedly suggest that Mumphrey approached Mrs. Pepitone demanding money and jewellery, threatening violence if she did not cooperate, chillingly stating he would kill her the same way he had killed her husband. Pepitone desperately shot Mumphrey many times and was acquitted on grounds of self-defense. However, many believe these events never actually happened, and several writers on the Axeman case suggest no real evidence of Joseph Mumphrey or Pepitone's widow engaging in this altercation even exists. Despite this, many believe the Axeman was the assailant behind 2 murders years before, in 1912, when an Italian couple named Sciambra was shot. The murder suspect, creepily enough, was referred to in newspaper accounts many times by the name of Mumphrey. While the method of this attack was drastically different to the Axeman's usual murders, if Joseph Mumphrey was in fact the Axeman, this Italian couple may have been his very earliest victims. On March 13th, 1919, a letter was published in the Times Picayune newspaper claiming to be from the Axeman. Some highlights from the letter are as follows: "They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleans and your foolish police call the Axeman. You may think of me as the most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands, for I am in a closer relationship with the angel of death. To be exact, at 12:15 earthly time next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I will make a proposition to you people. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is for certain is that some of you who do not have jazz on that specific Tuesday night will get the axe." That night, all of New Orleans dance halls were filled to the brim, and professional and amateur jazz bands performed at parties at hundreds of houses across town. Thankfully, there were no murders on that night. On August 10th, 1919, the Axeman once again targeted a grocer. Steve Boker woke during the night to find a dark figure looming over his bed. Steve actually survived the attack, regaining consciousness to discover his head had been cracked open. Boker thankfully recovered, but sadly could not remember any of the details of the attacker or the traumatic experience. The Axeman's attacks finally culminated on October 27th, 1919, and this was when Mike Pepitone was found struck in the head, covered in blood, by his wife. She witnessed a large axe-wielding man fleeing the scene, and her husband sadly died seconds later. As mentioned earlier, she believed the culprit to be Joseph Mumphrey. From this day onwards, no one saw the Axeman again. He vanished He or his trusty axe never darkened a doorway again. Other names floated around as the identity, although no strong evidence exists to link anyone definitively to being the true killer. Emmett Daniels was one of those names, a World War I veteran who was charged in 1917 with the murder of 2 women in Belgium, and was suspected of many more, but he ended up being acquitted on all counts. One witness asserted that Daniels killed one of his targets brutally with an axe. Because the majority of the casualties were of Italian descent, there is also the suggestion that the mafia were behind the murders, with the Axeman working for them as a hitman, picking people off. However, this theory was judged to be improbable, mainly because the mob would not have been as careless to leave survivors as the Axeman did, and at the same time there was not much evidence that pointed to the mob theory in the first place. Former convict James Gleason was at one point suspected to be the killer, and he was briefly detained on charges of attacking Anna Schneider. However, he was later released and fully acquitted. In recent years, a photograph has surfaced on the internet, allegedly taken around when Mike Pepitone was murdered. The photo depicts a man going inside the Pepitone's residence, holding what appears to be an axe. The authenticity of this photo is unknown. The only memory of the Axeman is sadly not discovering his identity and bringing him to justice, but the brutal reign of terror he inflicted on New Orleans all those years ago. Sadly, this elusive monster's legacy has left us all perplexed, horrified, and still seeking answers.